So now it's up to Jack. Jack's going to go into the White House, right? So he's running the Democratic primary. He needs the mob's help. Joe Kennedy does.
Yeah.
Okay, so they get a ton of money dumped into the West Virginia primary, where Kennedy just pulls it out against Hubert Humphrey.
History and the present is so gray, and people want everything to be black and white. And Jack is probably the greatest example in pop culture history of America of the gray. Like, we can all point to the philandering ways. We can point to the fact he was a Kennedy. His dad propped him in there. We can point to some of the relationships he had with people he shouldn't have relationships with. But on top of it, there was something about him that was so obviously iconic, and I think what drove that was the spirit of hope that he had. He represented that, as we headed into the awakening generation,
a new
15 to 20 years removed from World War II, he represented that new frontier. And let's kind of like Lewis and Clark went out there and found land. He's like, let's go to the moon. Let's figure out how to be the best in science. Let's try to make friends with Russia, or de-escalate at the very least. Let's look at a world that can be interconnected in beautiful ways. And so much of his hopes, we're kind of like admirable, what a little boy might say, when I grow up one day, I want to dream to do this. And this motherfucker was saying it out loud to the public as the most powerful man in the world. And there's something about that was beautiful, but there's also something about that made him a threat.
It made him a threat. And I also feel that he dropped the ball, and we'll get to that, with two major incidents involving the Cuban exiles to America. Yeah, involving Cuba.
Yep.
But I did want to make sure that the reader knows that this man was a patriotic hero. And, I mean, not only did he swim around collecting everybody, but he ended up swimming one guy in his teeth, dragging him in his teeth.
Wow.
Oh, he's incredible. Then he swam to islands alone trying to find food. He said to one guy, and he didn't say this maliciously. There was one guy who was thrashing around in the water. It's shark-infested waters. And he's thrashing around in the water, and Kennedy says to him, for a guy from Boston, he goes, you're making a real show out here, he said. And Kennedy, I pointed out that Kennedy wasn't doing it to belittle him. He wanted the guy to get his strength up and make it, and he saved the guy.
Yeah.
So, real heroism. So first, Joe Kennedy, to get back on track, first Joe Kennedy is Joe Sr.'s prize, and he wants him in the White House. Joe Kennedy dies, Jr. Yeah. Now Jack he wants in the Oval Office. Now they're focusing their attention on Jack. So now they promise, sort of like Joe Kennedy knows he needs everything he could pull out of the hat, and he needs the mob's help for Jack to get into the White House. Now, to be very clear, the Kennedys, through Joe, had a relationship with the mob, but so did Richard Nixon, who eventually went.
He did?
Absolutely. So first, Lyndon Johnson. Kennedy runs against, in the Democratic primary, Johnson was involved in the Democratic primary. He wanted to be president too.
Yeah, he was a real son of a bitch too.
Yeah, so he wants to be president. And Johnson was, and I'll get into this later too, Johnson was dirty in Texas. They called him Landslide Lyndon. He was always used to stealing votes. And this comes from Robert Caro, his premier biographer.
Yeah.
I read the multi-volume work that Caro wrote on Johnson, which, by the way, was incredible.
Caro did a lot of mob work too, I think, right?
Oh, no, well, Robert Caro barely touched. No, he barely touched on it. You're talking about somebody else, I think. Robert Caro barely touched on the mob when he did, what's his name? The guy from, the big Baron guy for the guy from New York. What the heck was the name of it? It was a great book too.
You're not talking about a mobster.
Look up Robert Caro. No, he's an author. He did the multi-volume work on Lyndon Johnson.
I'm seeing. Okay, so he did. Yeah, Lyndon Johnson.
Years in the Senate, Master of the Senate. He did all that.
Oh yeah, he did a ton of them. Robert Moses in the Fall of New York.
That's it. So he touched on the mob in a couple of pages in there because Robert Moses.
There's another guy I'm thinking of. Right now.
That was a great book too. I think that won the Pulitzer Prize. So I hope I win the Pulitzer Prize. They owe me a Pulitzer Prize. I came out of a prison cell, and wrote these books. I don't have an education from Ivy League colleges.
I nominate you.
Thank you.
I'm nominating you.
Thank you. Get a hold of one of these guys.
We'll talk to Joby, see if we can put in a good word.
Come on, right? They don't want to give me any credit? Give me the Pulitzer. So, P.S. So now it's up to Jack. Jack's going to go into the White House, right? So he's running the Democratic primary. He needs the mob's help. Joe Kennedy does.
Yeah.
Okay, so They get a ton of money dumped into the West Virginia primary, where Kennedy just pulls it out against Hubert Humphrey.
How many votes was that even for? West Virginia's small, right?
Well, it was a primary.
But for a primary, it doesn't carry as much sway.
It was still
right?
crucial though, because it was coming down towards the wire, and if Kennedy lost West Virginia, he's in trouble. So he pulls it out. Now, I list all of the sources. I went deep into newspaper archives. There was huge investigations into the West Virginia primary. Millions of dollars were dispersed through the Kennedy clan, and supposedly that came from Chicago, New York, and Vegas. A lot of the mob money was being poured into the West Virginia primary because Joe Kennedy convinced the mob himself and through his liaison, Frank Sinatra, who was very close not only with the Kennedy family, but also with the mob chieftains across the country.
Yeah.
He convinced the mob, look, Bobby's going to move on. Don't worry about Bobby and Jack. They're both moving on. So the mob buys it for the most part. The New York and Chicago mob, which are the two titans involved, they kind of they bought into this. They figured, Sinatra wouldn't lie to us. Joe Kennedy, we've dealt with him before. His word is law. If he tells those boys to back off, they will. And we believe his word when he tells us that. So we're going to back them. And they're expecting at least 4 years, if not 8, of just run wild.
Yeah.
And that's what they want.
Yeah, and this was so, and I've always talked about this story here, but you did the in-depth research on it, I would imagine. Where it ended up playing out in the final presidential election was Kennedy won by a razor-thin margin. Could we pull up the 1960 election, Alessi, just so we can tell people how tight that was mathematically? Mm-hmm. But he was able to win Illinois and Texas because allegedly in the city centers, particularly Dallas and Chicago, a lot of dead people voted.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. Okay.
That's exactly
right.
So
we do have good evidence to back that.
100%. Yeah, and there's overwhelming evidence for both of those cases, and so now, and that leads into why Bobby was put in as AG. So that's lesser known. So at some point or another, there's overwhelming evidence that they dumped money into the West Virginia primary, and there's overwhelming evidence in the general election. So by the way, just to bring you up to speed, Johnson loses to Kennedy, becomes his VP. Right, so now there's the general election. They're going against Republican Richard Nixon.
Yeah,
and that's where exactly what you're talking about. Yeah. Overwhelming evidence in both cases. Yeah. No, but I'm glad you did, because the evidence that I found in both cases, such an abundance, there could have been multiple convictions if a Justice Department pursued it. But
what is the evidence like the evidence, testimony?
Okay, so there's no physical evidence. So there were several investigative teams for major newspapers and magazines that dove into the corruption, and they were either told to back down, stand down by the editors of their newspapers or magazines, or once Bobby was appointed AG. Now even J. Edgar Hoover at the FBI, he's getting phone calls from across the country and promises of all kinds of evidence, and it's coming across his desk. Once Bobby goes in as AG, and Joe Kennedy, the Kennedy family even said this. They said Joe wanted Bobby in to make sure that none of those accusations/allegations went anywhere. He's the only one we could trust, Joe said, to make sure that all of these accusations of voter fraud and all this other stuff, they were terrified that the election could be reversed or they could even end up in jail. So Joe, and I source everything in these books. I don't shoot from the hip.
I literally, I tell people this all the time. When I look at books, especially people who are going to come in here, I go to the sourcing in the back just to see how in depth it is, and it is really in depth.
Big time.
I'm impressed.
Not only Jules, not only do I source things, but I want to go find the original source.
Yeah.
So if let's say it's 1965, and somebody mentions something about the 1960 election, I want to find where the 1965 publication got it from. Maybe I find 1963. Then I want to find where the 63 got it from, a newspaper clipping in 1961. I go back all the way to find the original source because I want to test the original source.
You should have been an FBI agent.
Oh, I would have pinched everybody. Yeah. I mean, I think like that. You know what I'm saying? I never got caught doing the crimes I did. I never knew that a snitch could just talk and put you away.
You never got caught? You did 8.5 in prison.
No, but I never got caught in the process of a crime, in the commission of a crime.
Okay.
We got away. I was home smoking a cigar.
Right.
10 minutes later every time. going, I'm done.
Always a step ahead, Lou Ferrante.
Well, no, I didn't know the laws. I didn't know that. And that's the RICO laws. And I'm going to tell you, the RICO laws are despicable.
They're despicable.
Even though I got, look.
G. Robert Blakely's not going to be happy to hear
G.
that.
Robert Blakey should have worked for the Gestapo. Because seriously, that law is, it's basically, okay, so let's say I'm a criminal and I just came here after a heist and I got my stuff out in the back in the truck and I'm hanging out with you guys. According to G. Robert Blakely, you guys could get just dragged in on the RICO too. If I talk about it with you and say, look, don't worry about the truck outside. I'll take care of that later, Jules. I know it's in your parking spot.
Is it that simple?
It is. And they try to tell you it's not. But if they want it to be, if a prosecutor wants to drag you in on it, they can. They can. And it could be a weak case. I spent 36 months in a holdover fighting my cases. I went through 7 attorneys. William Kunstler, the great civil rights.
Yeah. Incredible attorney.
And
I had
Kunstler,
that's right, you did.
And friend.
Yeah, you talked to me about that.
And he became my friend too. It's William Kunstler. I had very briefly Barry Slotnick. Very briefly.
Another one?
He had to come off the case for a reason.
A reason? What was the reason?
Yeah, well, he took a nice chunk of money from me, and then he said that he had briefly represented somebody who was on the other side of the case.
Ooh.
And he had to come off, right. So
after the money, of course.
I interviewed Bruce Cutler. I liked
one?
him. Yeah, the guys up in the jail talked me out of using him.
That was Gotti's guy.
Well, Pete Gotti sent him up to see me.
Yeah.
And I liked him. I liked the things that he said on the visit. But they said, look, if you're going to try to go in there and say you don't have anything to do with the Gottis, but you have Bruce Cutler as your mouthpiece, you know what that looks like, Lou? And I said, yeah, you're right. I can't use this guy.
Yeah.
You know, like this isn't, if I had gone to trial.
Yeah,
So
that's a good point.
Yeah, so, but anyway, so to get back on track.
Thank you guys for checking out this clip. If you haven't already subscribed, please subscribe and hit the like button on this video. It is a huge, huge help. And if you'd like to check out this clip's full podcast episode, that link is in the description below or right here. And finally, you can follow me on Instagram and X by using the links in my description below.